Okay, everyone, this is my spoiler review of X-Men the Animated Series Season 2, Episode 12, Reunion Part 1. This originally came out February 12th, 1994. Please make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any X-Men content on this channel. Everything is going to be X-Men related. Reviews of shows, movies, figures, you name it. So make sure you don't miss out and hit that subscribe button. It's interesting, as I've talked about this whole season, I've been frustrated with how they only give little bits and pieces of the Savage Land story with Professor X and Magneto, almost to the point that we don't really get to see their characters that much this season, which I'm okay with, but I still always prefer to see a full episode of that storyline. And as you watch the previously on this episode, it basically is what that episode basically could have been. If you took all those clips I showed you throughout this season, it really does make one episode, which I think might have been a little more effective, but I see both sides to it. Now, one of my issues with this episode, I will say, is that I have been led to believe that there's this mysterious villain that's different from Mr. Sinister that would be running the Savage Land through the season. That got me excited. It's that great way to build up a big bad that you don't know who this person everyone's talking about is. So it was a little flat to be the person we already were introduced to earlier in the season. You almost wish that they just saved it, kept it Mr. Sinister, but didn't show Mr. Sinister's face yet. Or that whole sequence we saw in the beginning of the season with him having Jean and Cyclops, why not have that be now, where we are learning about him wanting the essence of these mutants? Just bring that together with this and don't do everything so early on, because it makes this less impactful, this episode. Now, going more in depth about the episode, we see that X and Magneto don't have their powers, obviously, and they're under attack by Skyriders while climbing. But I love, though, that the powerless Magneto uses a branch to swing on and just kicks one of these Skyriders down. I thought that was hysterical. Now, they run into this full crew of Magneto's former mutates, and this is the first time we actually see the appearance of Lupo. And Vertigo's been pretty sick in the series, not gonna lie, from the small screen time she's had, but big impactful moments. And again, here she was really cool and knocks out Professor X and Magneto. Now, on the other side of things, we see that Morph left a cassette tape for Wolverine, and it says he needs help, and he tells him to go to the Branson Theater, but this is obviously a trap set up by Mr. Sinister. But it's cool that when we see the theater, I love that Morph is starring in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It's perfect for his character, because that's what his character is going through right now, where you have an evil Morph and a good Morph. And where I'm saying it feels redundant from the story we already saw is that, as before, he's mentioning to them that Mr. Sinister wants Jean and Scott, which we already knew. We already saw this. I wish this was the first time we were hearing this. Now, it was really cool. Back in the Savage Land, we get our first appearance of Kazar and Zabu. And their first appearance we saw in X-Men was Uncanny X-Men number 10 from 1963. It's actually not one of my favorite comic issues, though, believe it or not. But I love when they go to such older characters like a Kazar just appearing in an animated series like this. Pretty cool. Now, Kazar saves Magneto and X, but he's really doing it because he wants his revenge on Magneto. It's cool to get to see him ride this three-horn to attack the mutates, and he sees Magneto as the devil. He's like, if he had not created those cursed mutates, our people would not be enslaved, and my wife would not be a prisoner. And that wife he's talking about is Shauna, who we saw in the cliffhanger, who was captured by Sora in the last episode. But this is where Professor X diverts his anger, and he's like, look, there's some master who has a real problem. This isn't really on Magneto, he's saying. But he basically says to Professor X, if Magneto betrays me again, I'm killing you. Now, back at the theater, when Jean and Scott and Wolverine fight Sinister and his group, it was pretty cool to see Jean remove Scott's shades when they can't use their arms, and she's doing it by telekinesis. And then Cyclops proceeds to kick Sinister's ass here, but that's where Ruckus stops that. And then when they're taking Jean onto the plane, I love when Wolverine's diving onto Slab to save Jean. He's like, you grabbed the wrong girl, fat boy. But it's Morph, of course. So he got fooled and Jean is taken. But why they didn't proceed to still try to take Scott as well, because he's so important to Sinister, thought that was strange. They kind of just left him. Now, Kazar brings Magneto and X to his former citadel, and he's like, your citadel, Magneto, is sickness in the heart of our land. And Magneto says, it was not meant to be. When I built it, I had great ambitions for this world. And that's where Professor X has one of his great lines where he says, unfortunately, Magneto, the ambitions of powerful men usually bring strife and misery to those they would improve. Really good line and just a great quote in general. Now, Professor X says there seems to be a chill wind tonight, and Kazar goes, a one that has been blowing since the first day Magneto came to the Savage Land. So he's throwing heat at Magneto nonstop here. You almost want Magneto to be like, okay, Kazar, relax, I get it, I messed up. Now, one of the best parts is they find Magneto's old lab, but it's been overrun, and when they see it's all of the mutates, Kazar is basically like, well, I'll find another way to free my wife. See you later. That was so great that him and Zabu just jumped in the water. And that's where we see Brainchild as a really cool character for the first time. But this is where you get the reveal that's Mr. Sinister behind all this, which, again, just fell flat because we've already had the big Sinister introduction. So this felt like an introduction. Again, where I wish this was his first intro. That would have been really, really cool if you're just hinting at him the whole season and we didn't really see his face yet. Now, Sinister explains how he has had them powerless on the Savage Land. He used a tissue sample from Soren, allows the drive to draw energy from any mutants in the Savage Land, rendering their powers inoperative, and that the mutates have a device that protects them from this, so I'm sure these devices are going to come into play in the next episode. And you see Morph is still there. Poor Morph, he's trying deep down to fight back against this, and this pisses off Sinister, and he's like, you know what, he just throws him to the wall with X and Magneto, and Sinister wants Professor X to call the X-Men here. This is when Sauron shows up, and he's like, resistance is futile, obey me, and this is where Sauron can use his hypnosis on X, but you see Professor X, again, has such a strong mind and resistance, and he's fighting back, and he's thinking of the X-Men, which I thought was great, and it's showing a little slideshow of all of them, and he's like, too many people depend on me. And then Sinister, after Charles seems taken over, he goes, oh, Charles, wakey, wakey. And then Charles says, what do you want from me, master? Now, if I know Professor X, he's a clever son of a gun, and he likes to do this move where he fakes that he is influenced or taken over, but he's really not. So I'm going to predict that he's totally fine here and is putting on an act. And that's when you see Professor X sends a message to come to the coordinates to the X-Men, and this is where Beast sends something's off with him, and Cyclops and Wolverine show up, and they basically go in the Blackbird to save X. Great cliffhanger to set up this big finale of season 2 and part 2 of the story, and Cyclops is like, brace yourself, people, we are going in. So actually it was my favorite part of the episode, was just having such a solid cliffhanger to a part 1 of an episode with that. It pumps you up there. I do think the episode suffers, though, from sins of earlier in the season, that it could have been planned out better to make it have more shock and payoff. I get what they were going for, but I think because we already had Mr. Sinister have a big episode and already seen a lot of him and his intentions, that this kind of felt more flat in its approach and didn't really deliver where you'd want it to. So I see the idea, I see why this could have been great, but it just, unfortunately, because of past decisions this season, I don't feel is great and pretty forgettable. But it was cool to see Kazar here, and it sets up really well, hopefully a great finale, so I'm excited for that. But I'm going to give this one a 7.7. Again, not one of my favorite episodes. Disappointing, to be honest, but I also kind of saw that coming because I felt like they showed so much and hinted so much that how are they going to live up to this hype of everything they built up for this reveal of the big villain in the Savage Land. So it didn't really deliver on that, but I still really thought it was a fun episode, but at the end of the day, not really memorable. Let me know what you thought of it down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I read every comment. I try to respond as many as I can. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of my reviews of X-Men, the animated series, and all things X-Men, and I'll see you next time.